Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and there's a new expansion for Hearthstone that is coming up, the Savers of Uldum, I believe is how that's pronounced. And we can now look at the cards, so it's time for us to sort through all the cards and try to get a general idea of what this new expansion is all about. So, to see the cards, you will go into crafting mode. You include uncraftable cards because the cards can't be crafted quite yet, and then you will filter down by Uldum, U-L-D-U-M, Uldum, maybe. I think it's Uldum. I think I've heard it outside. Now, normally, what I would do is I'd start with Druid and then work this way all the way to neutral cards. But you know what? That's never really worked out that well because while each hero class gives you maybe 2 pages of cards to look at, it's not making much sense. Like that sentence, it doesn't make a lot of sense as far as what kind of synergies you're going to have until you look at the neutral cards, and by the time I get around to the neutral cards, I'm at the end of the stream and the end of the recordings. So today we're going to do it backwards. We're going to start with neutral cards first and then go to Druid and then go to the next hero class, and so on and so on, and each of those will get broken up into separate videos later on. So starting with neutral, we have this first card, which is a 1 mana 1 attack 2 health minion type called Beaming Sidekick. It is a common type, which is the basic. It goes common, rare, epic, and then legendary. Frankly, I would kind of like to see them get rid of at least 1 tier there, but I'm not sure if there's going to be much improvement in Hearthstone for the few more years that it still has maybe some life into it. In all honesty, it is worth mentioning that while this probably isn't the last expansion I'll cover, the main person in charge of Hearthstone, Ben Brode, has left Blizzard. Many people have. Many people have left the parent company Activision also. And Ben Brode is going on to open a company called Second Dinner that has a contract with Marvel to make a Marvel card collecting game. When that game comes out, I'm expecting I will jump onto that as early as possible, alpha, beta stages. And since I've been playing Hearthstone for 5 years, I've had the full life of the experience. I think that I can probably get out of this card game. So this might be the last one. It's also been a very weird release because instead of making a Pixar-esque animated video to promote it, which is what they had been doing to promote Hearthstone in general, and it was working, I think, pretty well, although it did often give the case, the instance of there being a much more child-friendly environment for Hearthstone than there actually is, because Hearthstone's too complicated a game for little kids to play, quite frankly. It is not Pokemon, the trading card game. It is much closer on the spectrum to something complicated like Magic the Gathering. And I imagine I would go Pokemon the card game is the easiest game that is well known. Then Yu-Gi-Oh is more random and more complicated by far than Pokemon. Then you have Hearthstone, which is less random but still complicated and slow. And then you have Magic the Gathering, which is the most complicated and the slowest. But I don't want to get into too much of a conversation here because we're supposed to be looking at the cards. So this card has a battle cry effect, give a friendly minion plus 2 health. This is pretty much just a basic card, and I'm not going to do commentary on all these cards. But every card that comes out these days in expansions are effect cards, and they tend to move up the power curve. There's no longer a 1 mana 1 health 1 attack minion with a battle cry. Now it's getting replaced with better things. Those cards still exist in at least wild play, but again, nobody plays wild play, and that they've been superseded by more powerful cards. Unfortunately, the way cards are getting added is weird because they are added in expansions, but then expansions are on this schedule to be moved into the wild set. And once a significant amount of the cards went to the wild set, you can see there are more expansions in the wild set than there are in the standard set of right now. So you constantly have to replace this card. 2 years from now, there will be something along the lines of a 1 mana, 1 attack, 2 health minion with a battle cry to give a friendly minion plus 2 health, when there's really no reason for that to happen. There's other ways you could work around that instead of renaming cards. Speaking of changing cards or just replacing cards, there's been a few art changes that recently happened just for basically censorship reasons, which is rather weird. Not at the behest of anybody as far as I can tell, but just at their own internal censorship beliefs. So moving on, we have a 1 mana, 1 attack, 1 health minion called Jar Dealer. Death Rattle, add a random 1 cost minion to your hand. I definitely have seen a card that does this same thing. Next we have a 1 mana, 1 attack, 1 health epic card called the Mogug Cultist. If your board is full of Mogug Cultist, the sacrifice them all and summon Highkeeper Raw. So this is new. This is something I have not seen anything about, but I'm assuming that the Savers of Uldum is kind of an Egyptian themed, ancient Egypt themed style expansion. So I know there's mummies, and we now know there's cultists, and we know that there's Highkeeper Raw. So it's not a bad theme to do, frankly. Some of their other themes have been very simplistic or kind of just not made any real sense at all, or they were so tied into the World of Warcraft canon, which I've never played World of Warcraft. I've played Warcraft, but there's a big difference there. So expansions certainly have come out, and there's been a lot of lore behind them. There's a YouTube channel called Lore of the Cards that you can watch to try and get some of that, but in all honesty, it goes in so much depth that it's too long a video for me to maintain any interest. If I just want to play a collectible card game, I shouldn't have to watch an hour-long video to explain what happened in World of Warcraft, to explain who these characters are. And inherently, that's the benefit of playing a Marvel collectible card game. It's going to have a lot of popularity. It's going to have a lot of characters who have been explained in Marvel movies or comic books, or you just generally know the gist of who they are. I don't really need to know anything if there was a collectible card in a collectible card game that was just Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America. I get those general ideas. So the next card we have is a 1 mana, 1 attack, 1 health Murloc class, I guess is what you call them. Murloc class minion called Mummy. It's a mummy Murloc, and it has a key phrase called Reborn. I bet this key phrase means at the end of your turn it resummons. There was the Dreadsteed, I believe was the name of it. It was animated to look like a nightmare, a horse, a demonic horse, and originally that card would resummon whenever it died. It just had a death rattle that said resummon this minion, and it turned into a mess for some kind of weird combination, and so they changed the title, the description, to have it resummon at the end of the turn, which changed the mechanics slightly. I think they've probably expanded that concept just into a key phrase, reborn. Now, whenever you introduce a key phrase, the question is, at first glance, seeing this key phrase, do you understand, in general at least, how this mechanic works? Or should there be more text, plain or written, written more plainly, so that people can understand what's going to happen at a glance? I would say Reborn isn't very informative, because it doesn't really tell me how it resummons, or if it resummons at all. I mean, I could be totally wrong. It could be just that it's getting labeled as a thing that's been reborn. You could take it that way too. That's just not something that's ever been done in Hearthstone before. So, yeah. Until we can play with this card, I'm not 100% sure how it works. I'm only about 80% sure that it probably summons at the end of the turn. Of course, you can only have 7 minions on the field, so if you can kill something and then fill your enemy's side of the field with 7 minions, then they won't reborn. And I'm not sure if there's really any other way to get rid of that style of minions, so I imagine we won't see the reborn key phrase used on larger minions very often. Next, we have a 2 mana, 2 attack, 1 health minion called Bug Collector. Battlecry, summon a 1/1 Locust with Rush. Unless there's a card somewhere that says do something with locusts, I'm going to assume that a locust is just a non-craftable minion. When there's something like this that summons something else, particularly when it's something that you can't play separately, you never can really look at the art, see who the artist is, see the flavor text over here. That's a shame. There's plenty of room on the PC version over here on the left for sub characters to have a card. It really wouldn't be that hard to do, or at least have a button so that you could look at these cards, but they don't do that, so it is always in a weird position with those kind of cards. You never really get a good look at them. Next, we have a 2 mana, 2 attack, 3 health epic card, Dwarven Archaeologist. After you discover a card, reduce its cost by 1. Discovers an old key phrase. You get a pick of 3 cards. You pick one, it goes into your hand. The cards are randomly generated. They are not from your deck. Next, we have a 2 mana, 3 attack, 2 health Murloc class card called Fish Flinger. Battlecry, add a random Murloc to each player's hands. I am wondering, as we're seeing a slight increase in Murlocs, if that means one of the previous expansions that's about to go into Wild will be losing a bunch of Murlocs. I think Witchwood would be the next to leave. Maybe Witchwood and Boomsday at the same time. Yeah, I think Witchwood actually did have quite a few Murlocs. And that's where you get into this weird position where they're constantly just remaking and replacing cards that are going into Wild for not good reasons. When it would have been easier just to say, hey, we like these cards, we haven't found any problems with these cards, they're not overpowered, let's just leave them in standard play and let people play with them, and be more precise and limited in what cards actually have to go in the Wild. Very few cards really need to go in Wild, they just kind of need to be nerfed. The only thing I guess is that they're trying to continuously push people to play the pay-to-win aspect of this game and buy more cards when they really shouldn't need to. But yeah, that's about all I can say on that. It is also, I think, worth mentioning that we still don't really have a good introductory experience for new players. So if there are a lot of new people that join and start playing Hearthstone in this next expansion, which is always a hope, you really have to play for like 2 weeks before you can unlock all the basic cards, and then you really have to struggle to try and get all the classic cards just to be somewhat competitive, on top of needing to kind of buy at least the latest set and trying to get as much of that as possible too. As a free-to-play player myself, it's not a great experience trying to compete against people that have just paid to own every card. Next card we're going to look at is 2 mana, 2 attack, 6 health minion called the Injured Tatvir. Taunt, Battlecry does 3 damage to this minion. Interesting the way this is phrased. Deal 3 damage to this minion. I'm fairly certain I've seen other cards that have a Battlecry does 3 damage to itself. So they're not even phrasing it the same way as it used to be phrased, which screams that there's a different writer behind with not the same amount of tight procedure and management behind that, because you want the phrases to be almost exactly the same, in the same line breaks, in the same font, so at an instance you can just scan that or that description and recognize what it's saying, leaving as little room for misunderstanding as possible. Also, you want the exact same phrase each time, because when then you have to give that phrase to the localization team that is around the world translating it into many different languages, the translation looks as similar as possible in every card, or every similar card. So next we have a 2 mana, 2 attack, 1 health minion, Kobold Sand Trooper. Death Rattle, deal 3 damage to the enemy hero. This feels like a slightly improved version of a bomb minion that does 2 damage to the enemy hero when it dies. And that's like a 0 attack, 2 health minion, I think, for 2. So they're just slightly moving the numbers around. Next we have a 2 mana, 2 attack, 3 health minion called the Neferset Ritualist. Battlecry, restoring all adjacent minions to full health. This is going to be very powerful as a card. Really haven't even mentioned any of the previous cards because they've been so basic and just replacements. There is something, I suppose, to be said about this card, is if you are playing a bomb deck that is built around just putting bombs in your opponent's deck and putting bomb minions on your field that do damage to your enemy's hero whenever they die, well, now you've got 2 more cards that add to that strategy, and eventually, if you had enough cards that added to that strategy, the strategy itself would become extremely more successful than it probably should be. So there is a danger of just adding more of the same thing, because the card game, as most card games work, only allows you to have 2 copies of card in your deck. There almost certainly would be a strategy you could play if you could have 30 cards that are exactly the same in your deck. Yeah, I'm sure there's a card out there that's 0 mana and does 1 damage or something where if you had more of them it would work. Well, there definitely is a Murloc card. There's a 1 mana Murloc card that gains 1 attack every time another Murloc is summoned. You could have that card in your deck. There's a legendary Murloc that summons out of your deck automatically when you play a Murloc. That would work extremely well too. If you could have 7 of those in your deck immediately. Let's move on though. This is a great card though. Restoring for 2 mana the adjacent health of some minions that could have 12 health potentially on the field early game. That's going to be used way more often than I think they think. Next we have a 2 mana, 2 attack, 3 health minion called the Questing Explorer. Battle cry: if you control a quest, draw a card. Now, quests were introduced a few expansions ago, 4, maybe even 5 expansions ago. You get them on the first draw. You have to satisfy the requirements of the quest to be given some major successful card or encounter or something happens. There's Crystal Cave if you play 5 of the same card using magic spells, because again you can only have 2 of the same card in your deck. Then everything in your deck becomes a 5 attack and 5 health. I'm not really sure that drawing a card and building around the quest works, but it might, because this expansion, once we start getting to the hero classes, may have a new hero specific quest in every hero class. I imagine what we'll find out is at least 3 of the heroes have new quests, because they seem to be sticking to that concept. Quests really are the only thing that have been added to Hearthstone probably in 5 years. There have been key phrases certainly, but nothing big enough to feel like a major improvement. So 5 years down the line, this doesn't feel like Hearthstone 2.0. It doesn't feel like Hearthstone 5.0. It feels very much like Hearthstone 1.0 5 years later, which is part of the problem why it's getting old. Next we have a 2 mana, 3 attack, 2 health elemental called Quicksand Elemental. Elemental being a hero class that has been around for a while, but again, not super useful. There's a mage elemental deck that seems to work pretty well, but not that great. It has a battle cry: give all enemy minions -2 attack. This turn, that minus is really small to read. I would like to see it changed. It feels almost like there should be a down arrow in front of it instead of a minus, and then an up arrow and everything else. Then it would be more of a visual, yeah, it's going up to, it's going down to, instead of having to use mathematical signs. Next we have a 2 mana, 0 attack, 3 health. If it's a 0 attack, of course it can't attack. Minion called the Serpent Egg. We won't run into really any spells or anything special in the neutral card sets. I think of pretty much all minions. This minion has a death rattle to summon a 3/4 sea serpent, but there's very limited reasons why a minion like this would ever be attacked, since it's just taking up space and can't do anything on its own. So it often is not a card that you would want to play. It's a little strange that serpents aren't falling into the dragon hero class, or a dinosaur hero class, or a beast hero class. Dragons and beasts exist. Dinosaurs and serpents don't exist. But you could easily have said this was a murloc, a beast, or a dragon, and tried to make a little bit of an argument to put it in one of those hero classes. But they didn't. So we'll keep an eye out to see if there are any other serpent cards, or if that's the only one. Next we have a 2 mana, 2 attack, 4 health minion called the Spitting Camel. It is a beast class. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to another random friendly minion. This might work if you're playing a warrior with minions that get enraged or gain armor every time a minion takes damage, or gain attack every time a minion takes damage. But outside of playing a warrior deck, I don't think you'd ever want to play something like this that would just damage your own minions. in a weird way, doing 1 damage feels like way too much to do. I think eventually, if we were to continue to play Hearthstone and they were to continue to make cards for Hearthstone, you'd have minions that have 10, 20 health for 2 mana, and taking 1 damage would make a lot more sense. That's in part of the power creep that we'll have to see if you want to continue to have a balanced game. Is you'll have to see, as the minions do more and more damage, they'll have to introduce minions with more and more health. Next we have a 2 mana 1 attack 2 health minion called the Temple Berserker. It has Reborn, has +2 attack while damaged. Of course it only has 2 health, so it's not likely to have many instances in which it is damaged. Again, the Reborn key phrase, and it's another mummy, but it's not labeled as a mummy class. This game is kind of back and forth. Sometimes it's got some cards that say every human character. I know there's not a card that actually does this, but there's something along the lines of that, like every human character gets +1/+1, but then there isn't a human class character class, and then you'll have some that are in character classes, but then they don't really feel like they fit, and then you'll have some that clearly feel like they should fit into a character class. They seem to be a little reminiscent to add any more classes. Next we have a 2 mana 2 attack 2 health demon minion called the Vile Fiend. It has lifesteal. This feels like this is a slightly worse version of the Succubus, which the Succubus was changed. The name was changed, the art was changed, so you can't even find the Succubus. It was a classic card, because I think that was a 2 attack 3 health minion for 2 mana. The only thing I could say here is it is a demon minion in the neutral cards, but really all demon cards should be warlock cards, because it's the warlock that plays demons, nothing else really can. So it seems like they made 1 extra warlock card and just threw it into the neutral class, so to fill out their numbers, and that's not a good way to go about it. If anything, I would argue at some point they should probably think about just getting rid of all the hero specific cards and making everything neutral. That would certainly make the game a lot crazier and add a whole bunch of combinations and weirdness to the game, but it would give it definitely a breath of fresh air too. And it would save them a lot of time when making new cards. They could just make new cards and throw them out as neutral classes. Next we have a 2 mana 3 attack 2 health legendary minion. That's what this little dragon portrait means. Legendary gold gem called Zephyrus the Great. He's an elemental class battlecry. If your deck has no duplicate, wish for the perfect card. I assume wishing for the perfect card is the equivalent of discovering effects for a perfect card, or perhaps there is an actual card that you can possibly get from this that is just called the perfect card and game's over. Now, inherently, if you can play a game that at turn 2 where you have 2 mana, or turn 1 if you go second and use the coin, if you can play this and it's a 1 out of 3 pick, let's say it's just 3 cards upside down and 1 out of 3 is the perfect card, And the perfect card has, by its name being called the perfect card, such an amazing effect then that it changes the entire gameplay. A lot of people are going to try and play this, and Hearthstone's going to get really annoying really fast. I have often wanted something like the Yu-Gi-Oh! Exodia solution, where you win a game very quickly if you satisfy about 5 requirements, so that there would be a faster way to beat a game in Hearthstone, since most games in Hearthstone are usually about 20 minutes if you're playing it kind of slow and trying to actually win. It would be very nice if things sped up, but on the other hand, this speeds things up way too much, and it would be very frustrating if you started to see a lot of people play this card and win very fast, or get so far ahead that you might as well just concede because there's no catching up. Now, they did put a card in called Mechathune that will win the game for you, but you have to have played all the cards in your hand and all the cards in your deck, so Mechathune is the only minion on the field, in the deck, or in your hand. Everything else has to be completely gone, and you have to find a way to kill Mechathune to activate its win death rattle condition. And it's like a 10 mana minion, so you definitely are going to be on at least turn 10 before you can play Mechathune. Something like this is turn 2, so I have to assume odds of getting the perfect card are pretty low, and getting the perfect card doesn't actually do that much, even for a legendary minion. That again is something that we'd have to just play with though, and figure out what, if anything, that is worth. Next we have a 3 mana, 3 attack, 2 health minion called the Candle Taker. It also has Reborn. Next we have a 3 mana, 1 attack, 1 health beast called Desert Hare. Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 Desert Hares. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a card out there that says give all your Desert Hares +1 and +1 attack, or something along that line. Next we have a 3 mana, 5 attack, 4 health minion called the Generous Mummy. It has Reborn. Your opponent cards cost 1 less. I suppose you could play a couple of these and support your opponent. There was a brief time I had a helper deck in which I would play people online and give them every kind of advantage I possibly could, so that they could play whatever cards or play whatever strategy they want to play as fast as possible, and show off. I lost the helper deck because there was just not enough slots to save a deck like that, but I certainly, with a card like this, could rebuild a helper deck. Next we have a 3 mana, 2 attack, 2 health beast called Golden Scarab. Battlecry, discover a 4-cost card. So a 4 mana card, you get 3 randomly selected cards. You take the pick of 1 to add to your hand. Discover, not as good as summoning a random card, or your pick of 3 random cards. Next we have a 3 mana, 3 attack, 4 health minion called History Buff. Whenever you play a minion, give a random minion in your hand +1/+1. There is several cards that would synergize with this rather well. Cthulhu in particular, because when you summon Cthulhu, he does his amount of attack automatically, randomly amongst all enemies. So if you're playing this on the 3rd turn, by the time you got to turn 10 and played Cthulhu, you might have him up to 20, 25, even over 30 attack. Plus, if you're playing Cthulhu in particular, there's several other cards that buff up Cthulhu. Next we have a 3 mana, 2 attack, 3 health minion called the Infested Goblin. Taunt. This is our first minion with Taunt. Death Rattle, add 2 1/1 Scarabs with Taunt to your hand. Not as good as summoning 2 1/1 Scarabs with Taunt. So I assume it's probably 1 mana for a 1/1 Scarab with Taunt. So this is something that's probably not as good as it seems. Next we have a 3 mana, 3 attack, 3 health minion called the Mischief Maker. Battlecry, swap the top cards of your deck with your opponent's. There's, so far as I've seen, no way to put a specific card at the top of your deck, short of removing all other cards from your deck, which might work. There very well might be something to that, but I can't so far think of any one card that would make that worthwhile. But it's an interesting concept. That if you could get something like a Mega Bomb or some kind of card that does 30 damage to the enemy's hero when drawn, and you put it in your deck, and then you play some kind of spell that gets rid of all the other cards in your deck, because let's say that they are minions, and let's say that there's a card out there that says get rid of all minions in your deck, then you'd only have 1 card in your deck, then you could swap it around. But that's a super complicated strategy that I don't know if those cards actually exist. Next we have a 3 mana, 2 attack, 3 health minion called Vulperia Scoundrel. It has a battle cry, discover a spell or pick a mystery choice. So my guess here is that this would still give you 3 face-up cards to pick from to discover a spell, and 1 face-down card, which, if it is a face-down card, this would be potentially the first instance of ever actually showing the card backs during gameplay outside of the edges of the game board. Maybe it won't do that. Maybe it'll just have a card back that's face down that's just like a question mark, or maybe visually it will depict itself completely different. This is certainly a new concept, though, picking a mystery choice. Now, there is a card in Wild that says any cards that are or choose, it used to be choose 1, and then it would give you 2 options, or choice, and then it would give you 2 options. There's a card in Wild that would say do both of the choices. So if you were to have that card on the field and play this, I'm not sure if this is phrased in such a way that those cards would interact. One would assume they should, but I'm not sure that they would. And that's such a rare niche condition that I doubt I'll ever see anybody ever do it. Next we have a 4 mana, 4 attack, 4 health minion called Body Wrapper. Battlecry, discover a friendly minion that died this game, shuffle it into your deck. So this would be a choice of 3 minions, assuming 3 minions died. If no minions have died, then it won't do anything. If 1 minion has died, it'll just show you 1 minion. So on and so on. Next we have a 4 mana, 2 attack, 5 health minion called the Bone Wraith. It has Taunt and Reborn. Because it has Taunt and Reborn, that's more evidence in my mind that Reborn means summon at the end, resummon at the end of the turn, because if it was to resummon after it died immediately, then there would be no way to defeat this minion ever. After you killed it, it would just resummon. It would have 2 attack and 5 health again, with taunt meaning that it has to be attacked before your hero can be attacked. It would be a nearly impenetrable wall. You'd have to silence this minion at that point. It could also mean, it occurs to me, that Reborn is actually a one-time thing, and that might make sense too. So instead of resummoning at the end of every turn, it might just resummon at the end of a turn, or resummon right then and there, but then it doesn't have the reborn key phrase anymore, so it only happens once. If that's the case, that would be more like the twin spell cards that were recently introduced, where you can play them once and then you can play them twice, but you can't play them over and over again in the same way that echo cards could be played. Next we have a 4 mana, 3 attack, 10 health minion called the Conjured Mirage. Taunt: at the start of your turn, shuffle this minion into your deck. Is there something here that makes sense? You play this on the 4th turn. It stops people from being able to kill it on the 4th turn because of its high health, and then when it becomes your 5th turn, then what? It's just back in your deck, so it's only good for 1 turn. It's probably not that good of a card at that rate. Next we have a 4 mana, 6 attack, 5 health minion called the Sunstruck Henchman. At the start of your turn, this has a 50% chance to fall asleep. Falling asleep is a new key phrase. I assume that it means the minion would have summoning sickness and can't attack that turn, as it was called in, like, I think Magic the Gathering introduced summoning sickness as an idea. So yeah, I've never, it feels like Frozen is a very similar equivalent to this, so a 50% chance to freeze itself would have been more in line with what we've seen before. Next we have a 5 mana, 0 attack, 5 health minion called the Desert Obelisk. If you control 3 of these at the end of your turn, deal 5 damage to a random enemy. Well, again, you can only have 2 cards in your deck, so it would be a tough strategy to have 3 of these on the field, and I don't feel like there's a good way to do this. Even if you had 7 of these on the field, then you'd be doing 35 damage at that point. So I guess if you could get 7 copies of this card on the field, you might win in 1 turn. But realistically speaking, I don't think that people would play this very often unless there's something it synergizes with. Next we have a 5 mana, 3 attack, 3 health minion called the Faceless Lurker. Taunt: battlecry, double this minion's health. This is another one of those cards that if you can buff it up in your hand so it has a health of 10 and then play it and it has a health of 20, then that would be useful, but not super useful. You would then still need to play something like a spell card to change its attack to the amount of health it has, and then you'd have to be able to attack with it to do major damage. You have to be very aggressive in Hearthstone. Having a lot of health and a lot of defense will only get you so far. Next we have a 5 mana, 8 attack, 8 health minion. It is a mech class minion, which mech classes in general have been all over the board. They're seemingly supporting them consistently now, but when they were first introduced, there was no new mech cards introduced for like the next 2 or 3 expansions after that. So it was nearly a year before they started seeing any new mech cards, but I think they finally figured that out. So it was called the Mortuary Machine. After your opponent plays a minion, give it Reborn. Why would I want to do this? This is one of those negative effects that you get because it has so much health and attack. There's only a select small number of cards out there that, if your opponent had them on their side, would be beneficial to you. There's like one that will do damage to the enemy hero every time it takes damage. There's a couple, I think, that will do damage to the enemy hero just by being on the field, but not a lot. 2, maybe 3 cards like that. Most every other minion is very beneficial for your opponent to have. Next we have a 5 mana, 4 attack, 5 health minion called the Phalanx Commander. Your taunt minions have +2 attack. I could see this getting played pretty well, particularly if you're playing a taunt deck, although there's not a great reason why you would want so many taunt minions on the field. It kind of destroys the idea of taunt minions, because you'd want to play 1, maybe 2 taunt minions on the field to protect several other weaker minions, not just have an entire deck of strong taunt minions, or strong in their health but not that strong in their attack minions. And if you had 7 taunt minions on the field, then that effectively gives your opponent 7 options and 7 picks to attack. Next we have a 5 mana, 4 health, 5 mana, 4 attack, 2 health minion called the Wasteland Assassin. It has Stealth and Reborn. This is the first card we've seen with Stealth. Stealth is kind of an underused factor. It hasn't been ever really much done with it. Next we have a 6 mana, 5 attack, 5 health minion called the Blatant Decoy. Death Rattle, each player summons the lowest cost minion from their hand. Okay, you might be able to do something with that. Yeah, all Stealth does, by the way, in case you're not familiar, is when you play a stealth minion, it's in stealth, so it can't be directly attacked by the enemy until it attacks first. It's not very useful, and very rarely does it stealth synergize with any other effects to make the card worth playing. Next we have a 6 mana, 3 attack, 4 health minion called the Kartut Defender. It has Taunt and Reborn, and a Death Rattle to restore 3 health to your hero. This seems pretty good, assuming Reborn means it resummons at the end of each turn. That means every turn your opponent would have to kill this minion again, and every time it dies it would give 3 health to your hero, potentially restoring you back up to the max health points of 30. That's rather good. Most of these other cards not super impressive. They seem to be very middle of the road and just kind of generic. Next we have a 7 mana, 6 attack, 6 health elemental called Siamat, I guess is how that's supposed to be pronounced. Battlecry, gain 2 of the Rush, Taunt, Divine Shield, or Wind Fury abilities for this minion, I assume. This doesn't mean, that you would summon or draw 2 Rush cards. So you'll give an option of 4 cards, 4 abilities in this case. Rush, which is not as good as Charge because that means you can't actually attack the hero, you can only attack minions on the first turn. Taunt, which we've talked about. Divine Shield, which means you don't take damage the first time you take damage. Or Wind Fury. So it would make a lot of sense to do Taunt and Divine Shield if you were being defensive, and Divine Shield and Wind Fury if you're not being defensive. I suspect you're not allowed to take 2 Wind Furies and then attack 4 times in a turn. If there's a lot of minions on the field you want to kill, Rush and Wind Fury would let you attack twice in that first turn it's summoned. Next we have a 7 mana, 3 attack, 9 health beast minion called the Wasteland Scorpion. It just has poisonous. Poisonous means when it does damage, it kills the enemy. regardless of if it does just one bit of damage or whether it does a whole bunch of damage. Next we have a 7 mana, 7 attack, 5 health minion called the Rat Golem. Reborn. At the end of your turn, summon a 1/1 Scarab with Taunt. So here's an example of Reborn being a key phrase. I don't really understand how that plays. And then the old key phrase of at the end of your turn, summon a 1/1 Scarab with Taunt being mixed on the same card. That's kind of silly. And I guess at a certain point you would fill up your field with 1/1 Scarabs with Taunts, and then potentially a card like this could not be reborn. Next we have an 8 mana, 8 attack, 8 health beast minion called the Octosari. Death Rattle to draw 8 cards. Drawing 8 cards is the largest amount of cards I have ever seen. This could be used in a lot of strategies, particularly since there are several cards out there that would get something like this on the field in one form or another. There's cards that would summon a 1 mana version of this with 1 attack and 1 health that would die and then draw 8 cards. There's ways to summon a card like this that don't require you to actually spend 8 mana in a few instances. What you'd really want to see something with this though is how can you get this card on the field of your opponent and then kill it so you make your opponent draw 8 cards. Personally, I will say I think that dealing just 1 damage for fatigue the first time you run out of cards and overdraw, and then having that fatigue go up by 1 each time is not a great deterrent, detriment to the point where it draws the games out more. I think it would be nicer if when a minion, when an opponent runs out of cards, it either flips a coin and decides who's the winner on that, or it causes a draw to happen when an opponent runs out of cards. I don't think that the Yu-Gi-Oh style of if you run out of cards you lose immediately is too bad, but I could see a reason why you wouldn't want that. But their current fatigue system just is not a demotivator to play 40-50 round turns in a single game, because you can heal yourself, you can add cards back to your deck, you can really work around fatigue for several extra turns. Next we have an 8 mana, 5 attack, 6 health beast called the Pit Crocolisk. Battle cry, deal 5 damage. Dealing 5 damage is a pretty high amount. It's a little surprising this isn't a Murloc though. Kind of looks like a Murloc, or at least feels like something that should eat Murlocs. Next we have a 9 mana, 9 attack, 6 health minion called the Anubisath Warbringer. Death Rattle, give all the minions in your hand +3/+3. That's not terrible. It's not particularly great either though. Next we have a 10 mana, 10 attack, 10 health minion, legendary minion, Colossus of the Moon. It has Divine Shield and Reborn, which is nice, certainly. Almost certainly, if you play this, it would be very hard for somebody to kill this in the first turn alone. Next, we have a 10 mana, 5 attack, 5 health minion called King Ferocis. That's dangerously close to another word, medical term that I don't think you'd want kids to know about, so I won't mention it out loud. But I will say this game has gone out of their way to slightly change names before, but I think they're getting ridiculous with it now. It would have made a lot more sense if they had just said this was King Pharaoh or Pharaoh in general, which means king, instead of saying King Feroces. So yeah, this is a 10 mana, 5 attack, 5 health legendary. It has a battle cry for each spell in your hand. Summon a random minion of the same cost. If you're playing a mage deck, maybe that would make sense, but I'm not sure if that really does much. It's a very random thing. Anything with random in the name is not something that a professional Hearthstone card player is going to want to do. It's really just for people who are playing for fun. Next, you have a 10 and a 10 attack, 10 health minion called the Living Monument with Taunt. This is actually a pretty great card. We're also getting more 10 mana, 8 mana, 9 mana minions, which we certainly have been somewhat short on those compared to 1, 2, 3 mana minions. So when you run into spells that will evolve a 7 mana into an 8 mana, there's more of a random selection of cards that it will evolve into. So looking at the neutral cards, we have a general basis and a general understanding of what they are. It doesn't feel like beyond Reborn that there's going to be any key phrases that change up the gameplay too much. So yeah, next we will go through each of the hero classes, but let's break up this recording first. So as always, at the end of my episodes, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos, because these things help me with YouTube and help me potentially get put in front of more people's eyes. When you subscribe, if you actually want notifications, you have to go through the notification bell settings to get all notifications. YouTube's crazy, it's silly, it's stupid. All of it's silly and stupid. Like, I'm begging people to like, share, and subscribe, even if you really didn't like it or don't want to share it. Down below in the description box, I have links to a bunch of social media sites. That's a good way to follow me and get notifications when inevitably YouTube doesn't give out notifications. And if you really, really want to support me, you can cut out the middleman of YouTube by supporting me down below via a link to Patreon, or you could just friend me on Steam and gift me a game or a gift card. That's a one-time gift that is easier than giving $1 every month. That's going to be it for this recording. As always, thank you for watching. Have a good evening.